Glad you made it back, everybody. The CDC Advisory Board unanimously approving a recommended vaccine schedule calling for children to begin getting doses of the China virus shot at 6 months old. In a Salcedo Show exclusive, 20 Texas lawmakers have signed this open letter to the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, rejecting the agency's efforts to force kids to get the China virus vaccine. Joining me now is Texas State Representative, former Chief of Staff at HHS under Trump, and China virus task force member, Brian Harrison. Representative, welcome back. Why is the CDC's move here so concerning to you and 20 other lawmakers?
Yeah, Chris, always great to be with you. This CDC purely political and anti-scientific decision is particularly concerning for two reasons. One, it is creating rampant confusion from coast to coast. Parents all across the country are terribly concerned now that the CDC, through their action, is going to force a COVID vaccine on their child. And, I feel a little bit uniquely suited to be able to add some clarity to the situation, having been the chief of staff of the agency that oversees the CDC and standing in unison. And I'm very proud of the 19 other members of the Texas House of Representatives for standing up and publicly rebuking the CDC for the action they've taken here. And the second reason, in addition to confusion, is it's absolutely an indirect way to force COVID vaccine mandates on the youngest and most vulnerable among us. And that's our very young school children, because the CDC, while they're talking about it as a recommendation, they know full well that unfortunately many states across the country blindly defer, they're derelict in their duties to the unelected bureaucrats in the CDC, who should never make healthcare decisions for children, by the way. They defer to them, and this will have the result of millions of school children across the country being forcibly vaccinated because of many local and state governments saying whatever the CDC recommends, we're going to force it on our kids. And myself and 19 other colleagues are standing up, rebuking the CDC and saying, no, that will not happen here in the state of Texas.
I want to talk more about that because peer-reviewed data clearly shows that children without serious comorbidities are not at risk from the China virus. States like Florida are going to make data-driven and scientific determinations and then come up with their own guidance. Isn't that the biggest concern here, that lazy, big government, blue states will just rubber stamp, well, the CDC says, so here's our mandate, without doing their own due diligence, doing the job they were hired to do?
It's absolutely the concern, and we know for a fact that that's going to happen. We know kids are going to be harmed as a result of this. I mean, you mentioned peer-reviewed literature. It's been, I think, almost a year now, perhaps even longer, that respected researchers at Johns Hopkins and others have put out data showing that absent severe comorbidities, very serious underlying health issues like cancers, leukemias, extreme autoimmune disorders, children are at statistically zero risk of dying from COVID alone. So, I mean, kids are infinitely more likely to die in a car being driven to school or from school than they are from COVID that they catch at school. And so we're going to be mass vaccinating indiscriminately millions of school children, knowing for a fact that even if it's small, even if it's 1 in 5,000, some kids are going to develop myocarditis from this and other adverse events as a result of the vaccination for a population where there's no statistical benefit. I mean, the CDC, in an unprecedented fashion, put this on the recommended schedule without any clinical data whatsoever, with zero evidence of efficacy in this population. It's completely a political decision by unelected bureaucrats at the CDC, and they got to be stopped.
Yep. My biggest concern is that we've got people who are hired all over these United States, in the various states, to do a job. You're hired to evaluate data and make decisions for your population based on the science. And this idea that, well, whatever the CDC says, that is the most irresponsible form of government. And frankly, as I said, in blue states, that's how they waste the taxpayers' money. They're do-nothing sponges of the taxpayers' money. And that's what I'm standing opposed here to. There's also another aspect of this. Dr. Vinay Prasad, the University of San Francisco, he is openly worrying that the CDC's moves here will do more to undermine the public's confidence in vaccines than all the combined efforts of what he calls an irrational movement, that is the anti-vax movement. Isn't this the danger of allowing politics, left-wing or otherwise, into medicine? And shouldn't the CDC reverse course on this?
They absolutely should reverse course on this. Biden should end the public health emergency, and he should end all of the tyrannical mandates coming out of D.C. I've said this from the time I was in the Trump administration dealing with Operation Warp Speed. If your goal, let's assume your goal is to maximize vaccinations for COVID. The worst possible way you could do that would be to bring in the coercive, heavy hand of government and tell millions of people, we're going to strap you down to a table and force a vaccine needle into your arm against your will. Because let me tell you, if you didn't have doubts about that vaccine before then, you will now. So I've said this for a long time, that the heavy-handed vaccine mandate crowd has done more to increase vaccine hesitancy than any anti-vax organization ever could. We're starting to see polio come back. We're seeing parents starting to decline routine child immunizations that have long histories of safety and efficacy. And it's why I introduced legislation, and we'll do it so next session, to ban all COVID vaccine mandates in the state of Texas. I mean, this is a line in the sand issue for liberty. If unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. can force needles into our arms in Texas against our will, we might as well give up on individual liberty, freedom, state sovereignty, the 10th Amendment, medical autonomy, informed consent, and the entire Constitution. We must stand up and reject this tyranny coming out of Biden's CDC.
Texas State Representative Brian Harrison, thank you, sir. Appreciate the time here as always. Still